Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to our next video lesson. In this particular video lesson, you're going to be creating the famous 15 puzzle game. And the idea is this. You're going to create this puzzle which has a total of 16 squares. And then the idea is you want to renumber the squares so that this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then the black square would be down here. Now, I don't know if you'll recall this, but when I was a kid, this was like a game that it would fit in your hands and you would move the pieces with your thumbs and you'd move the squares around. Well, here these buttons aren't going to be actually physically moving around on the form. All we're going to do is we're going to change the value of the cell and also the back color of the cell. And also the idea is that you have a reset button so that if you were to solve it, you could reset and start all over again with a new puzzle. Or perhaps maybe you just don't like the hand that you were dealt, so to speak. So if you click the reset button, it's going to shuffle and randomize all of these pieces. Okay? And then also, when you first start the program, it also should randomize all the different squares so that you have a random setting for every time you start the program. All right, so here's some of the different user requirements. Here's some of the different software requirements, so forth and so on. All right, let me go over here to Visual Studio. So I've already created a Visual Basic Lab 23 project, as you can see here, and I created the graphical user interface. Let me go ahead and give you some tips here in terms of when you create the graphical user interface. So for example, for these squares, you don't have to do them the same size as mine, but if you want to, then here's what I did. In terms of the size, you can see here that the width and the height for each one of these are 75 pixels, right? So this is 75 by 75. You could just take this one, copy and paste it, and then copy and paste it. As you can see here, once I have a button, I just simply move it into place. I use the guidelines to move them into place, and that's how you'll create all 16 of these. Now, the text property is as follows. So you have 15, 14, 13, 12, so forth and so on, right? You can see the text property, and it's important that for this one, that text property should be 0, as you can see here. The text property is 0. Now, you can't see it because the background color is black and the font is black. For example, if I just took the back color, say for example, and if I change this to white, okay, so there's the text, you see that. But when I make it black, as you can see here, then you don't see the text property, which is, of course, 0 in this case. All right, so first of all, start off by creating this puzzle with all the 16 buttons. Then, of course, you're going to have a reset button. By the way, the names of these buttons are as follows: BTN0, BTN1, BTN2, so forth and so on, all the way to BTN15. This button over here is going to be BTN reset. You don't have a minimize and maximize button, and that's it. All right, let me run the program just so that you can see a sample of what this thing is actually going to do. So as you can see, this has been randomized, right? Initially, we didn't have this. We had 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so forth and so on, but obviously we randomized it. In fact, check this out. Here's the black one, 2, 8, 3, 1. Okay, let me stop the program. Let me start it again, and we should see a different puzzle. There it is, right? It's been randomized again. All right, so let's stop it. Randomize it. Let's see, it should be randomized again. Okay, very good. Did you notice how the black one appeared there 2 times? It just happened to, but this time the black one appears over here, the black button. And let's run it one more time. Okay, now the black button is over here. All the numbers are reset. In fact, clicking reset, as you can see, is going to randomize the puzzle pieces. Okay, so you have this. And again, the idea is to try to make it so that, let's see here, so that you can get 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll just do the first row really fast here. That's all that I can probably do. This could be kind of tricky. All right. Let's see here. 1, 2, 3. And you see how that works out, where clicking all the adjacent buttons, right? So if I click this, anything that's adjacent that is clicked next to the black button is switched. But in this case, if I click 9, 14, 1, right, nothing happens. If I click 4, there's a swap. If I click 11, there's a swap. If I click 6, there's a swap. So any adjacent button, a diagonal wouldn't work. For example, if I click 8, nothing happens. If I click 3, nothing happens, right? Okay, so that's what the attempt is, to create this game so that the user is actually trying to make it so that they're all in order. All right, here's something that we need to consider. First of all, I am not actually swapping the physical location of each button. For example, if I were to start this program, and if this is the black cell, this is the number 1 cell, I keep on saying cell, sorry, the button, right? So this is the 0 button, this is the 1 button. When I click the number 1, you know that 1 is supposed to go over here, and then that this button is supposed to go over here, right? This is not what is happening. Please note that this button is not physically moving over here, and this button is physically moving over here. That is not what is in fact happening. So let me undo. Undo here and undo here. That is not what is happening. What is actually happening is that the value of this goes over here. This value goes over here. Now you know that this value is 0. As you can see over here, the text property says 0. So the 0 is going to be placed over here. The 1 is going to be placed over here. Here's something else we need to swap. This is a black background. This is a control background, kind of like a white looking background, right? So this color needs to go over here, and then this color needs to go over here. So in other words, these two need to be swapped. Their color needs to be swapped, and their text property also needs to be swapped, okay? So that's actually what's happening. The button, this will always be BTN 0. This button will always be BTN 1. All that we're doing is just swapping the values and swapping the colors. Does that make sense? I hope you're all nodding your head saying yes. Okay, so having said that, let's also discuss the theory behind shuffling. Well, we want to shuffle these pieces around. How do you do that? Well, here's the one technique that I've learned, and I'll share this with you. So what we'll do is, let's say that we'll take this button right here, and then I'm going to ask the computer to generate a random number from 0 through 14. So let's say that the number 1 comes up, okay? So I'll take whatever comes up, always take that button and shuffle its contents with this one. So if this one came up, this would be shuffled with this cell, or with this button. If randomly I selected 9, 9 would be shuffled with this. Whatever button is actually going to be selected randomly, then it's always going to be shuffled with 15. All right, so I'm going to retype some values just to kind of give you a visual idea of what this is going to look like. So let's say that I tell you, pick a random number from 0 to 14. Let's say that you tell me 5. Okay, now these two are about to be swapped. Okay, so this text value is going to be 5. This text value, sorry about that. This text value is going to be 15. Okay, so do you see how the 5 and the 15 were selected? And by the way, the color is also going to swap. Okay, so I don't have to actually do that because they're both the same back color, which, as you can see, darn it, there we go. As you can see, they're both control, right? Control just simply means that whatever the definition of a control is in your Windows operating system, which in this case is like I don't know, a beige or a gray, whatever that is, that's what the definition of this color is. So the colors are swapped, the numbers are swapped. Then I say to someone else, give me a random number, and that person says 8. Okay, so now let's take 8 and swap it with this. So this is going to be, let me go down to the text property. This is going to be 8. This one is going to be 5. Okay? And then one more time, I say to someone, give me a random number, and they say 12. Okay, so 12. So that means that this one and this one are going to be swapped. So this is going to be 12, and this one's going to be 8. Do you see within just 4 shuffles, isn't this already starting to look a little bit more random? And that was just 4 shuffles. What if I shuffled this thing 100 times? Well, then I think you can see and determine that really this thing would be sufficiently randomized if I were to do this procedure 100 times. And look at this, I only did it 4 times. Not bad, huh? Now remember, you're not just swapping the numbers, you also have to swap the back color. And I deliberately didn't swap it with this one because I didn't want to have to take the time to change this to black. All right, I'll do it right now. Okay, so let's do it. Let's say I ask you, give me a random number from 0 to 14, and you say 0. Okay, so this one and this one have to be swapped. So this goes to 0. This is going to go to the number 12. This back color is going to be black. So let me select a back color of black. And then this back color is going to be control. So let me see if I can find control. There it is. All right. That's a little bit different color, but that's okay. When you run the program, it's going to be the same. So that's how this thing works. Okay, so now let me just undo a whole bunch of times here until I can get back to where I originally started. Now we've restored order to the universe. I think you can understand how the shuffling routine will work. Any random number that you pick from 0 through 14, you will always shuffle it with this last button right here. And then if you do that procedure 100 times, this thing is going to be randomly shuffled. Okay? All right. Here's another thing we also need to consider. When you click a button, certain other buttons need to be checked. For example, if I were to click this button, a swap will only occur if there is a black button that is adjacent to it. Well, this one's not black, this one's not black, that one's black. Perfect. So now I can take this and swap it with this, take this, swap it over here. So this becomes the black 0 button. This becomes the 1 button. All right. Now in this case, if I were to click the number 7, well, I'd have to check 3, 6, and 11. Did you see that? Only check the adjacent cells. I'd have to check 3, 6, and 11 to determine if any of those are the black button. How about if I click 9? Okay, well, if I click 9, I have to check 5, 8, 10, and 13, because 5, 8, 10, and 13 are the adjacent buttons. If I click 12, I'd have to check 8 and 13. So I think you get the idea, is that whenever you click a button, you always have to check each of its adjacent cells or adjacent buttons to determine if those are in fact the black button. All right, so if I started with this, I'd have to check 1 and 4. If I started with this, I'd have to check 0, 2, and 5. If I click this, I'd have to check 1, 3, and 6. If I'm clicking 3, then I have to check 2 and 7, so forth and so on. Okay. Well, again, we're checking to see if the number is 0, because that's why I deliberately put the text property for this button. I deliberately typed in a 0 here. So what I'm saying is, I told you before, check to see if it's the black. But and I guess you could do that. You could say, you know, is the back color black? Well, you could do it that way. But the way that I did it was, I just checked the number. So the black button is also the 0 button. So if it's 0, then do a swap. All right. So in this case, if this button is clicked, I have to check 1 and 4. Okay. So remember, I have to check 1 and 4. So let me double click on this. All right, so I double click on that button, and sure enough, I wrote myself a little comment that says you're going to check 1 and 4. Okay, let me move this aside here. All right, well, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to say if BTN1, remember, if we click this button, we're checking BTN1 and BTN4 to see if maybe one of those is the 0 button or the black button. Okay, so we're going to check 1 and 4. If BTN1 is equal to 0, if the text property is 0, right, then let's swap the colors and the text property of those two buttons. So in other words, if this one and if this one and this one, right, so if I click this and if this were the black or the 0 cell, then let's swap these two. Okay, so if that's the case, I'm going to create a function called swap. Now I haven't shown you swap yet. I'll show you that in just a minute. But what swap does is it just says take these two buttons and swap them. So this one goes to the left, this one goes to the right. Okay, they're both being swapped from one to the other. All right, so this function swaps two buttons. Now that was when we checked button 1, right? So in other words, if I click this, I have to see if this one is the 0 cell or if this one is the 0 cell. I keep on saying cell, the 0 button. All right, so I checked 1, now let's check 4 if I click this. All right, so that's what this next part is. Else, if you clicked BTN0, check to see if BTN4 is the 0 button. If it is, then swap BTN0 with BTN4. Swap the colors, swap the value. So you'll notice I'm swapping 0, 0, because that's the cell that was actually clicked, or the button that was actually clicked. All right, that's how this is going to work out for every single button. So if I click this, I'd have to check 0, 2, and 5. So sure enough, 0, 2, and 5 are checked. Check to see if 0 is the BTN0 is the 0 button. Check to see if BTN2 is the 0 button. Check to see if BTN5 is the 0 button. If it is, then swap. Okay, let's try another one. For this button, I'd have to check 1, 3, and 6. So sure enough, I write myself a little comment, 1, 3, and 6. So I say if btn1.text is equal to 0, then swap. If btn3 is equal to 0, then swap. If btx6 is equal to 0, then swap. Okay, so we'll do the same thing with number 3. If btn3 is clicked, then we'd have to check 2 and 7, right? Because those are the adjacent cells. So I write myself a little note, 2 and 7. Okay, so I think you see the idea is we're checking to see if the other buttons are the 0 cell. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on all of these buttons so you can see the chunk of code, and that therefore you can stop my program, and then you can stop my video, I should say, and then type this on your program. So this is btn6. This is what the code looks like for btn7. And this is the code for btn8. This is the code for btn9, btn10, btn11, btn12. We're checking 8 and 13. So 12, there it is. This is btn13, btn14, and then finally btn15. All right, so that's what the code looks like. Again, I think you see the idea. You're going to swap. Well, let's take a look at the swap function. So that's another function that I created, and as you can see right here, actually it's not a function, it's a procedure. So I actually typed private sub swap. But now look at this, by ref. Holy moly, what does that mean? Recall that by val means you're sending me a copy. By ref means you're sending me the original. What are you sending me? Well, I want you to send me a button. In fact, I want you to send me 2 buttons. The first button I'm going to call first button. The next one I'm going to call second button. So here's how it works out. If I click on 0, if I click on this button, we have to check this and this one. We have to check 1 and 4, right, if I click this. So, as you can see here, if btn1 is equal to 0, then let's swap. Notice what I'm doing. I'm saying send this actual button. Send the original. Send this to the function. Send this to the function. Or I say function, but it's really a procedure. Send these originals to the procedure. All right, let's go back over here so we can take a look at swap. All right, so it is receiving these buttons as originals. Therefore, if I manipulate the original, I'm manipulating the original, right? I'm changing what you actually sent me. In other words, you're not sending me a copy, and then if I change the copy, hey, you have the original. It stays intact. The original, in this case, is not staying intact because you're sending it to me by reference. Now, why am I doing that? I'm doing that because I need to swap. This color and value needs to go in here. This color and value needs to go into here. So give me the original so that I can swap those. How am I going to swap them? Well, first of all, notice that I created 2 modular variables. So these 2 modular variables, as you can see here, are mStringTemp and mTempColor, m meaning modular. Okay, so this is just a string. It holds text. So this is what's going to hold the text 0, 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 all the way up to 15, right? This is going to hold the actual string inside of the text, inside of the buttons, rather. All right, this is going to hold the color of the button. So I declare it as color. See, this isn't an integer, this isn't a double, this isn't a string, this is a color. So in other words, this thing holds colors like black, blue, yellow, red, so forth and so on. It is designed to hold colors, not numbers, colors. Well, this is going to be the color of the buttons, right? So now that I have created these 2 modular variables, here's what I'm going to do. Notice that you have 3 sets of code here. You have this set, and then you have this set over here. My intention is to do this. Imagine that you had a glass of lemonade and you had a jar of punch. Well, how can you put the punch into the lemonade and the lemonade into the punch jar, right? Or how can you swap the contents of the 2? You can't. You need a third cup. So if someone else gave me a third cup, then I could put the contents of cup number 1 into the jar, or to the third one. I could put then the second one into the first, and I could put the third one into the second. So if I have 2 things full of drinks, right? One is punch, one is lemonade. I need a third one to do the swapping, and that's the whole purpose behind this. This is the third thing to do the swapping. So, that's right, one is punch, one is lemonade. I need a third one to do the swapping, and that's the whole purpose behind this. This is the third thing to do the swapping. So, the text from first button.text is going to go into the string. Then once I've done that, then the second button text can go into first button text, and then finally the M string temp can go into second button text. So you're thinking, wait a minute, what is this first button? Didn't Professor Solis say that these are supposed to be BTN something? Yeah, I did. When you're designing this on the form, yeah, this should be BTN. Well, in this case, what is this one here? This is BTN1. This should be BTN2, BTN3, BTN, so forth and so on. But notice what I've done here when I created this function. I'm saying that I'm creating this as a button, and I didn't put a BTN here. I'm calling it first button here. The reason why I'm doing that is because this is not a button on the form. I'm actually creating this object as a button. That's why I didn't put a BTN in front of it. This is nothing on the form. But notice this. When this function is called, when this procedure is called, you send me a button. Now, the way that you send me a button, so let me split the screen here so I can make this a little bit more visually understandable. Let's go to btn0.click. Okay, so btn0 click. Here it is. You're going to, okay, btn1 text is equal to 0, so therefore we're going to swap. Send me 0, send me 1. Okay, so you sent me 0. btn0 is now going to be referred to as first button. So when you're sending something by reference, it's like this. If my wife said, Robert, she's talking to me. If my son said, Daddy, he's talking to me. So my son has one way of designating me. He calls me Daddy. My wife has another way of referring to me, especially when she's angry. She calls me Robert. All right? They're both pointing to the same person, namely me. But notice how the way they're referring to me is different, right? By reference, they're referring to me differently, but it's the same thing. So you know what really this is? This is an address. And what we're really saying is that this and this both point to the same thing. I don't care what you call it. You can call me Daddy. You can call me Robert. It's the same thing. Okay, so this, because I sent it to the swap procedure, this is being sent over here, and I'm saying, hey, in this procedure called swap, I know you sent me BTN0, but I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to call it first button, even though we're really calling it the same thing. Or referring to the same thing, I should say. All right. So now what this function does, I keep on saying function. Sorry, it's a procedure. What this procedure does is it says first button and second button are buttons. So therefore, I've just swapped the text. Now let's go ahead and swap the back color. And you know what? I don't think I have to swap the fore color. I'm not sure why I did this. That's not necessary. Let me get rid of this. I don't have to swap the fore color. It's only the back color and the fore color. I'm sorry, the text that's changing. Just the back color and the text. All right. So now the swap function is finished. Right. So this, I need 3 of these statements here to swap the text. I need 3 of these statements to swap the color. Okay, so that takes care of what you do when you double-click a button, or when you click a button, not double-click it. When you click a button, it's going to do this swap. And now I've just explained how the swap function works. Now here's another thing that we also have to consider. When you started this program, it randomly shuffled all these things. And when the user clicks the reset button, I want to, again, randomly shuffle all of these things. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, it seems like a waste of time for me to use the form load. We've talked about form load before. In fact, let me go over here and see the find form load. Yeah, it seems like a waste of time to say, let's have form load randomize all of the buttons. And by the way, let's also have this thing called BTN reset. Let's see if I can find that. The BTN reset really is going to do the same thing. It's going to reset. Where is it? Here it is. BTN reset. It's going to reset the puzzle pieces, right? Or not the puzzle pieces, the buttons. It's going to reset the color. It's going to reset the text. Well, instead of putting the exact same code in here and also in here, why don't I go ahead and create a procedure called reset puzzle. And in that procedure called reset puzzle, this is what is going to be used to actually reset the puzzle if this button is clicked or if the Form 1 load function is clicked. All right, let's talk about the reset puzzle procedure and how it works. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create this variable called counter. We're also going to create this variable called myRandom, and it's just simply a random number generator. So it's going to create random numbers. Then I'm also going to create a variable called num. Now I'm going to use the for loop. Now we've talked about the while loop in the past. The for loop is kind of the same thing, really. It's a looping structure. That is, it loops something over and over and over again. But here's how it works out. Here's the nuance that makes it different than the while statement. With the for statement, you have a beginning, like counter is equal to 1, and then you have an end, which is the 100. So everything is all set up in one nice, neat, concise statement. So notice what this says. For counter equals 1 to 100. See, in a while statement, you'd have to do something like this. You'd have to say while counter is less than or equal to 100. Okay, so you'd have to do something like this. And then you'd have to say counter is equal to counter plus 1, right, to make sure that you increment it from, oh, and by the way, you'd have to initialize it, right? You'd have to say counter is equal to 1. So do you see how counter is equal to 1? That's this part right here. Okay, we're going to, as long as this thing is less than or equal to 100, that's what this thing means, go to 100. And then, of course, we have to say counter is equal to counter plus 1. Well, inherent in this is this, step number 1. Now, no one ever types step 1. If you want to increase by 2s, then you would have to put step 2. If you want to increase by 5s, you'd have to put step 5, so forth and so on. But if you're just increasing 1 by 1, then putting the step is not necessary. You can just leave this as is. Okay. So the nice thing about the for looping structure is it reduces all of this to just this, right? This one statement right here. Makes it much, much easier. Okay, so here's the for loop. And by the way, whenever you type in for, whenever you type this, when you press enter, then you're going to see this part over here is going to say next counter. That automatically gets added. Okay. So whenever you first type this, let me just go ahead and erase all this so I can show you what I'm talking about here. So let me cut. Okay, so if I were to press enter at this point, then next counter appears. All right, so let me undo here because I don't want to cut. I want to put all that code back so I can describe it to you. So let's do this. Let's let number, let me assign something to number. Specifically, give me a random number from 0, including 0, to 14. Now remember, by putting the number 15 there, this is an exclusive number. This is inclusive, which means give me a random number from 0, and by the way, including 0, but up to and not including 15. So really, the numbers that are going to be randomly selected are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, but not 15. This is not included in the pool of numbers from which to generate random numbers. Okay, so that's what's weird about this. This is called inclusive. This is called exclusive. Give me a number from 0, but less than 15. You can think of it that way. Okay, so num is going to be any number from 0 to 14. Well, if that number is 0, then swap btn 0 with 15. If that number was 1, swap btn 1 with 15. If that number was 2, swap btn 2 with 15. If it's 3, 3 with 15. If it's 4, 4 with 15. If it's 5, 5 with 15, so forth and so on. I think you can see the pattern. Whatever the random number is that was generated, 0 through 14 that is, then take that button. If the number was 11, take that button, 11, and swap it with 15. Everything gets swapped with 15. Like I described earlier in my video, everything gets swapped with this button over here, 15. So, and then of course finally our last consideration is if the number is 14, then swap 14 and 15. Okay, and then the next counter, all right? So what am I saying here? Go through this procedure of randomly selecting a number and then swapping that button with button 15 100 times. Well, I think in my earlier example, what did I shuffle this thing 4 or 5 times? You saw that it was not bad in terms of the shuffling. With just 4 or 5 shuffles, can you imagine if you did this 100 times? This thing would be totally randomly, sufficiently randomized. All right, so that's how the reset puzzle procedure works. And I think I've shown you all of it. Yep, that's it. So what's going to happen is on the Form 1 load, when I first load the program, hey, call that function or call that procedure called reset puzzle. Here it is. Oh, and by the way, when I click the reset button, right, when I click this guy here, in fact, let me double click it. When I click it, call that same function called reset puzzle because it's exactly what we want to do. We want to reset the puzzle. So now you know how this function works. All right, so let's see if there's anything else that I've missed. There's the reset. There's the Form 1 load. Here's all the buttons, 0, 1, 2, 3, so forth and so on. I've worked on all the clicking, and I think that's it. All right, so let's run through the program. See what happens. So I run the program, and let me click reset a couple times. Up, looks like everything is randomizing properly. Let's start the program. Let's see if we have a different configuration. Okay, so you see what this looks like? Try to take a snapshot of this. Let me stop it, and let's run it again. Okay, see how it's different? All right, now let's try to solve the puzzle. And again, I'm not going to solve the whole thing. What I'm really trying to do is just to click every button just to make sure that it works and that swapping takes place. So let me go across this horizontally. Now let me go across this vertically. Yep, looks like everything is swapping properly. And now I'm just going to kind of like randomly do a snake trail here to just make sure that numbers are being swapped properly. Yeah, looks like everything's all right. Okay, so this is what you would do for testing your code, just to make sure that everything's working properly. Looks good. Everything works fine. All right, let's run the code and stop it. So let's say that if I were to click btn1, right, I'm going to stop the code right here, just so we can see what btn1 looks like. All right, let's run the program. All right, I'm going to reset until I have to click btn1. Oh, perfect. Okay, so remember, this is btn0, this is btn1. If I click this, this content and color will go here, this content and color will go here. Okay, so watch what happens. So if I click this button, sure enough, here it is. That's btn0. It's saying, let's go back over here to the form. Okay, remember, this is really the btn0, btn2, btn5. It's saying, is btn0 the button that includes the 0 in the text? No, it's not. So let me step over that. That's why it moves on. How about btn2? Was that the one? Yep, that's it. Remember, btn2, as you can see here, it's 0. So that's true. So what's going to happen? It's going to swap btn1 and btn2. It's going to swap these two, right? So now when I go back over here to the code, and I'll say, let's step into the code. So I step into the code here, swap. So first button, as you can see here, the text is equal to 14. This text is equal to 0, which is what in fact is the case. So now this is going to swap those numbers. So if I swap these around here, all right, so now first button is equal to 0 and second button is equal to 14, so a swap occurred. And now over here, these next three statements, go back over here so you can see the code, are going to swap the color, right, the back color. So we'll swap the back color, we'll end the sub, and then now that the functions call is finished, if I were to click step over, we end the if statement and the sub. Let me click step over again. Now we should return back to the form, and voila, a swap occurred. Okay, and that's how the program works. You know, again, it's just a matter of just simply swapping the color, swapping the text value, and you're all done. So it's a lot of code to write. By the way, there's a much more efficient way of doing this. Maybe I'll share that with you probably like toward the end of the semester. There's a better way of doing this, but at least it gives you an idea of how to solve a program like this. All right, so this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this has been helpful. Have a great day. See you next time.